get. All right, so yeah, so today we're going to finish up on the previous week's lecture that we were not able to finish. So we're going to do it now, and then we're going to take care of the 25 pair color code. All right, so what we have here is the coaxial cable. Let me just bring it that way here. Coaxial cable bandwidth, all right? RG11, RG6, RG59, 58, you can see that the frequency limit, which would be the bandwidth of that, is 3 gigahertz or 3000 megahertz for RG11. For RG6, it's about 1000 megahertz or 1 gigahertz, same for RG59, and a little bit less for RG58. So let's take a look at some, maybe RG6, which was one of the most common cables that were pulled into the houses and whatnot. Originally, the purpose of that was to provide a cable television. Later on, that cable infrastructure was switched to providing the internet signal. Right? Now, when it comes to cable TV, the old days, that cable would contain all the TV channels. Let's say 100 some channels. Let's just say 100 channels of the cable television channels. So each channel would occupy about 6 megahertz. So channel 2 would occupy 6 megahertz of part of the spectrum. Channel 3 would again occupy 6 megahertz. Channel 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Each channel would have 6 megahertz. So you would have to use a lot of bandwidth to accommodate all the channels at the same time. So the bandwidth of this medium, of this cable, was important to have that bandwidth. So it basically means how much can you fit in there at the same time. So here's the idea of broadband. What would be another example of a broadband transmission? It would be the air. All right, so the air contains all kinds of frequencies. You have the radio stations that you can listen in your car when you're driving. You have some other things that are present. There's some police, fire, ambulance channels and whatnot. There's all kinds of channels are present. How do you distinguish what you want to listen to? Well, your radio in your car has something that's called a tuner. So the tuner basically tunes into that specific frequency that is present in the air, and it listens to only that frequency, right? Or the bandwidth that is allocated to that. So that means in the air, all the channels are present at the same time, and you're just tuning into the one that you want to listen to. So here's the idea of a broadband transmission, right? As opposed to baseband. We're going to talk about the differences between the broadband and the baseband. So we know the basic idea of the broadband so far. All right, so let's fast forward to here. Okay, here's the last week's slide. Excuse me. So channel 2 would go from 54 to 60 megahertz. Channel 3 would go to 60 to 66 megahertz, and so on. And within that chunk of spectrum, of electromagnetic waves spectrum, let's say 6 megahertz. See, there are 6 megahertz, 6 megahertz, 6 megahertz. There are 6 megahertz chunks, all right? And here's a train. So within that 6 megahertz, part of it would be at some point there would be a video signal. At some point there would be an audio signal. At some point there would be some other control signals, right? And then you move on to the next chunk, and again the same. There will be video, audio, and so on, and so on like that. So during the days when the cable television was provided. When you were using the remote control to flip the channel through the channels, you would get the channels when you move like a forward or backwards with the channels, you would get the channel instantly. It would just like a flip, 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 and the channel would appear right away, right? Because all the channels were present in the cable all the time at the same time, and it would just switch the tuner to tune to certain type of channel. Right? Now, when it comes to that was the broadband. When it comes to the baseband, which is being used for the digital transmission, the channels, when you flip the channel, you press forward or backwards the clicker, then it takes about a half a second for the channel to appear. Right, so that will be the difference. It is also a bit of a broadband, but there's some digital handshakes and all stuff going on, so that's why it takes a little bit longer. But let's keep going here. All right, so broadband connection, right? Broadband internet. All right, let's take a look at the internet signal. I have this thing from yesterday because this is a repeat of yesterday's class, so I just left this thing on the board. So when you say you have a modem here, okay, modem, as we know, it's a combination of two words, modulation and demodulation, or modulator or demodulator, modem. Okay, that's why it's called modem, right? So on one side, when it comes to the channel provided or the signal provided from the city or from outside, you have that signal in an analog form in the broadband type of in a broadband form, right? Once it hits the modem demodulates things, and from that on towards inside of the house, you would get the signal in a digital form, Ethernet, right? And this would be in the form of baseband, right? We'll take a look at the differences between them too. So let's just take a look at broadband here. What did I write here a couple of years ago? Broadband internet service is the most used form of internet access because of its high access speed. Right? It is offering the broadband internet service. It's offered in the form in different forms. DSL, which would be digital subscribers line, and this is over a pair of a telephone line, CO line. Okay. Then fiber optical fiber, that's also a broadband type of because a lot of things are present in that one strand of the fiber optic. Then cable, which we're talking about a coaxial cable, and the satellite. Right, so these are the pretty much most common things that are being used. The old dial-up connection is the only non-broadband internet service available, and even though it is cheaper, most internet users, are moving towards faster broadband internet connection. Most of the internet users are moving to. It is basically done. It's happened some time ago, right? So very rarely you're going to see something that's called a dial-up connection. What's a dial-up connection? A dial-up connection is you also have a modem, but it works a little bit different. Instead of connecting to a broadband internet service or signal, that it's almost basically it works like a telephone, right? So that was the earlier stages of internet service. You're talking about the early 90s, or the first half or the second half of towards 93, 94. That's when the internet started being available to the general public, right? So that modem would be connected to a regular POTS telephone line, right? And whenever you wanted to make a connection to the internet, you would press the button on the computer, the software would make the modem dial up a number. So it would pick up the line that would be connected to it, just like a telephone. It would dial automatically the phone number of the internet provider, that the internet provider would pick it up automatically, and there would be some communication going on, and the connection would be made. The problem with that was that if you only had one telephone line in the house, once you use that telephone line for the internet, nobody else can use the telephone because the telephone line was used to make the connection. Now, then the DSL kicked in later on, and the DSL stands for Digital Subscribers Line. So that means over the telephone, you can use the telephone as a telephone, and on top of those wires, or on that pair, on top of the regular telephone voice signal, there would be superimposed DSL signal, which is Digital Subscribers Line, which would be the internet would be superimposed on that. And you would use the discriminating devices such as filters. We talked about last time would be the POTS filters. So the modem would detect the internet signal, and the modem would be working in a different way. It would not be a dial-up modem. It would not be that. It would just detect that signal that would be superimposed on that line, which means you could still use the telephone as a normal telephone line. Then you would have to apply the filters before the phone to filter out the digital noise that was present in there. Or you could have one main filter at the demarcation point, which is point of entry, and that line will be brought into that filter, and from that filter will be a voice line, will be connected to all the telephones, so you don't have to use the filters on each and every telephone, and there will be another output that will provide the signal as in a dry loop form to the modem. Right? So that is it's already a broadband connection, because you would have different signals present at the same time on the same pair, same line. Okay. Now Ethernet right here. This is the signal that goes from the modem towards your computer equipment in the house. Best delivery would be something that's called a time division multiplexing, and in the form of baseband. Now, internet signal, which would be the analog, and it would be the signal type would be analog, and best delivery would be something that's called a frequency division multiplexing, right? In the form of broadband. Okay, so we talked about broadband, frequency division multiplexing, right? Let's see what that means here. Right, so here is a broadband scenario, and here's a baseband scenario. Let's go back to the broadband again, and then we're going to analyze the baseband. So in a broadband connection, connections are divided into channels. Each channel occupies a space within the spectrum that the medium or cable can handle, which means all the channels are present at the same time in that cable. All channels are injected into the medium at the same time. Communication between devices is established through tuning to a specific frequency. So here is the here's the MUX, and this is DMUX, right? So here's the multiplexer, here's the demultiplexer. Right? Multiplexing is combining things into one, right? Into one big bundle. Right? So you would have different channels going into the multiplexer. All those channels would be combined into one mishmash of a signal and injected into a medium, which would be the cable in our case. And then all that mishmash of the signal, all the combinations, I just put channel 1, 2, and 3, but usually like more than 100 channels. I'm not going to list 100 channels here. So the demultiplexer would fish out specific channels, it would separate them, and it could send them to specific outputs. So let's say this output here would be certain type of a signal or a channel, and this channel will be present on that circuit on the other side. And this was solved by using a device that is called a tuner, right? The old television set would have a tuner, and you would just have one output, because you would just pick which channel you want to be tuned into. But you can use multiple channels as well. Insert those channels into the multiplexer, combine them into one transmission line, and then demultiplex them or decombine them and separate them into separate channels again. So this is a broadband because all the channels are present in one one cable. Right? Now let's move on to something that's called the baseband. We have no channel division, right? So not all the channels are present at the same time in that cable. Each communication link occupies all the bandwidth that the medium or cable can handle. So that means the bandwidth, because we are only transmitting one channel at a time through that cable, we do not have to have the cable that accommodates such a large bandwidth to accommodate all the channels at the same time, because we're pushing them one at a time. So here's a big difference between broadband and baseband. So this has to have a huge bandwidth to accommodate all the channels, and this one doesn't have to have a huge bandwidth because we are shipping one channel at a time, sending one channel at a time. How is it being done by the way of baseband, right? Well, over here we have a frequency division multiplexing, and we have here a time division multiplexing. Right? It's like a time sharing over one cable. Imagine there is a wheel here spinning, and there's another wheel on the other side. Here's the multiplexer, and there's another multiplexer. And into this multiplexer, we have one channel, another channel, basically streams of data, right? And over here, we also have one channel. Notice those colors of the channels are the same on the inputs or on the outputs, and there's only one cable going on, and you can see they're basically injected there one at a time, and it's just switching. The multiplexer is switching which one to send at any given time, and it just keeps going. So imagine there's a wheel here with a spinning connector, and at one point the connector is going to be connected to this circuit. The key idea is that the multiplexer and the demultiplexer are time synchronized. So once this one here is hitting the first circuit, the other one also is going to hit the first circuit. So here the connection is made. When the wheel turns, this one is disconnected and the next one is connected. And the other one also does the same thing on the other side. They're synchronized. And so on. And it just repeats. It's just basically one at a time. Now, if these were telephone conversations between different people, so it'll be one telephone conversation here, telephone conversation A, B, C, D, and so on. You can send them over one cable. Now here's the thing. If those two wheels are spinning at extremely fast speed and they are synchronized, this person who talks to that person, they would not see the difference that the other ones are present as well, because the speed of the switching is so fast that it doesn't affect the conversation. It would sound like a continuous conversation. If it would be slow, that you would hear maybe every second word. But if it spins, if the multiplexer works really fast, then yes, you're going to hear just like a continuous voice. So that's basically considered the time division multiplexing, right? Time division multiplexing versus frequency division multiplexing. In this case, no tuning is involved because the signals are not assigned to the channels. Over here, we need to have a tuner to distinguish between the channels that are present all the time. Well, this is no tuning. It's not entirely true, because you would have to have a tuner on one side and tuner on the other side, but they will be just tuned to each other and stay that way. Okay? So there's no switching as far as tuning. And here's the idea. Each communication link waits its turn to talk in a time-sharing manner, right? So I just give you the example of telephone conversations, but there could be different things. Let's say right now at these days, you're going to have, they have the fiber optic lines provided to the house. And that fiber optic line, or the optical fiber, is, basically contains all kinds of different signals at the same time, right? So this this A transmission could be your television signal, right? and the television signal will be decoded on the other side. Then the other one could be, I don't know, your telephone service. So then the telephone service will be connected to the telephone circuitry. The other things could be some other signals, whatever it could be, and that's how the time division multiplexing is solved, as opposed to frequency division multiplexing. Now, does it mean that you could have a cable that is cheap or not as good or whatnot? No, it also doesn't mean that, because even though we are sending one channel at a time, so the cable has to handle only one channel. It doesn't have to be good enough to handle all the channels. It has to be good enough to handle one channel, because one channel at a time is being sent. However, when the bandwidth, sort of bandwidth plays a role, is how fast they can be switched, right? So that's also important. So yes, it has to be a good quality cable. You can't just have a cheap cable, right, for that. All right, so let's see here. Oh yeah, all right. All right, so I'm just going to touch up on the dial-up connection. Dial-up connection is not a broadband, and it's not a time base. It's a dial-up. The equipment uses a telephone line to communicate with whatever equipment is on the other side through a telephone line. It dials the number of wherever the receiver is, makes a connection, communicates, sends the message, or the communication happens, send, receive, whatever it needs to do, and hangs up the line, releases the line. That was the old way of doing it. Is it entirely gone? No, it's still being used. Not in the kind of a home scenario situation. However, some of the security alarms, they use that still. Some of the security alarms or fire alarms that are connected to the telephone line, you're still going to see some of that services. You're going to see less and less of that, because there's different type of connections are being present, like optical fiber. But still, some of the security or fire alarms or whatnot, they still use the telephone lines. So there's a dialer in the circuitry of the, as a part of the circuitry of the security system. If there is a burglary, if something happens, the alarm trips, then it's going to steal the telephone line and going to communicate with the monitoring station and release the telephone line. Right. So that's as far as that. Also, where it's being still widely used is the dial-up connections are being used as backup systems. How are they being used? Usually in the retail configuration. Imagine there's a store that has 5 or 6 cash registers, or POS. POS stands for point of sale. And all those cash registers are connected to the network. There are debit machines or credit card machines. They're called debit machines, or they are connected to the network. Whenever there's a transaction happening, the debit card or the credit card, that machine communicates with whatever the central equipment that needs to communicate through the network. Okay? So everything works. Everybody is nice and happy. Well, if something happens to the network fails, and a lot of things can fail. Things happen, right? So it could be a switch that goes bad. There could be a modem that goes bad. There could be something that makes the network go offline. And yes, it does happen once in a while. What happens is that the whole store is at a standstill. No transactions can be made, and that's bad for business. So what happens is that there are backup systems installed at the store's networks involving the dial-up connections. The dial-up connection, what happens is that the store, when the network fails, there's an automatic circuitry that shuts down. Let's say the store has 5 cash registers. Then when the network fails, all the cash registers are offline except one, because that the dial-up, the backup modem, kicks in automatically, and it's connecting automatically to one chosen cash register. So what happens when somebody wants to make a purchase, use the debit machine or credit card or whatnot? That debit machine does not go through the network, but is using the dial-up modem. So you swipe the card, then the machine picks up the phone line, dials up the phone number of the financial transactions provider, makes a connection, communicates, hangs up the line, and so on and so on. So the transactions are being done slower, and there's only one cash register that is open. However, the business can still go on until the network is serviced, and quite often it's within the same day. Right? So this is basically how it works, right? There would be this would be the typical equipment rack for in a retail configuration. And these cables here would be the cables that connect the patch panel ports to the individual equipment pieces, such as cash registers, PCs, computers, wireless access points, and whatnot. From there, each and every, so these are dry connections, right? From here to here in the LAN configuration, remember? And then from there, they are being connected. Each port is basically connected to a designated one-to-one port in a switch. It's the traffic controller. Okay? Then the switch is connected to the gateway, which basically sets things up with the outside world, and the modem is modulating and demodulating the signal from the digital to the analog signal, which is the internet provider, and that's basically connecting you to the internet, right? And then there's going to be that modem, right? It actually basically looks like that. The most popular ones that are still being made, still being produced, is by US Robotics, right? And that modem would kick in. So sometimes you're going to have, if you land a job in this field, you might have some service calls that are regular maintenance service calls that you are supposed to arrive at the store at a scheduled time, and the dial-up service people are also notified. So everything is done on schedule, and you're coming over, and you are taking the network offline for a little bit, and you're making sure that the modem kicks in automatically, and then the communication is being checked, and if everything works, bang bang, get a signature, client signature. Yes, the modem is verified that it still works when it needs to. Right. So that's the idea of the dial-up connection. So we just looked at baseband or broadband and baseband. The differences is that in the medium or a cable, all the communication links are being present in one cable. They have assigned different frequencies that they exist on, and the frequencies are so-called carriers. So it'll be a carrier frequency. What's a carrier frequency? It's a carrier frequency is a frequency that the tuner tunes into. It's listening to. Right? Let's say you have different colors of light. And let's say there will be a green light injected into the multiplexer, and there will be a demultiplexer that only is going to be tuned to see the green light. It's not going to see any other lights. And on that green light, there will be a signal injected, and the signal will be received on that green light by the demultiplexer or the tuner. Then the other one would be maybe a red light, and so on. So imagine that. So imagine instead of different light colors, imagine different frequencies. One thing is injecting a carrier of certain frequencies. On that carrier, there's information, and the other one locks onto that carrier and receives the information that's on that carrier. Right? So all the carriers are present at the same time in the broadband connection. Now, in the time-based, in the baseband, which involves time division multiplexing as opposed to frequency division multiplexing, because all the frequencies are present at the same time, and the tuner locks onto specific frequencies. So frequency division multiplexing, frequency division combining, right? Time division multiplexing, one channel is basically one chunk of data is being sent at one specific time. And then the idea is that the multiplexer and the demultiplexer are synchronized in some sort of way. It could be by one control signal, but if this distance is further, then there will be a control signal, okay, begin receive the data, and that signal would travel, and well, milliseconds, but I'm just slowing things down, and the receiver would receive that signal, okay, begin receive, right? And then it would be time aligned, that within that period of time, you're going to see specific pulses within that time. And then this thing would be listening and it would be timing those pulses. So there'll be different type of synchronization there, right? So synchronous or asynchronous synchronization, you can call it that way, right? So in the time division, so we were talking about time division multiplexing versus frequency division multiplexing. Broadband, baseband, right? Right, so that's pretty much as far as that. Now, we still have time for the second part of this class. Now, I might post this also. So in our YouTube playlist, you're going to see yesterday's class and you're going to see today's class, because I'm going to post them both. And I'm going to call this one repeat. All right, let's let's go to the 25-pair color code. All right, 25-pair color code. And we're going to have a lab as well that you're going to connect or terminate a 25-pair cable onto something that's called a BIX termination strip. Well, in telecommunications, there are a lot of channels sometimes, and there are a lot of physical lines going from one point to another. And if you just had 1, 2, or 3 wires, you could sort them out, even if you lose the labels or whatnot. 2 or 3 cables are not that hard to trace. But if you're talking about 600 cables, 2,000 cables, pairs, then some form of organizing things would be a really good idea, right? So that's how some of the systems were invented, and 25-pair color code is one of those great ideas. Imagine you have a termination strip that accommodates or connects one end of the 25-pair cable. 50 conductors, 25 pairs. And goes across somewhere to the other side of the building, and it's connected to another termination strip that accommodates the other end of that cable. Now, how are you going to connect those pairs? Are you going to just connect them as it goes, not paying attention to any kind of order? And you're going to do the same thing on the other side. And yeah, don't worry. If we are going to, we want to trace one pair, we're going to put some tone and look for that tone on the other side. And if we need to another one, we're going to do the same thing. Now, that would be a very inefficient way of doing it. It would be messy and it would be very disorganized. Not a very good idea. So a color code was invented, right, or established. So pair 1 on this end is going to be pair 1 on that end. And pair 17 on this end is going to be a pair 17 on the other end, if those 2 ends are terminated properly according to the color code. Now, the first 4 colors of the 25 color code you already know, because we're doing the labs right now as we speak. Right? And here's the thing. The data cable, right? The Ethernet data cable. It has 4 pairs. It has a blue pair, orange pair, green pair, and brown pair. So this will be the first 4 colors of the 25 color code. So the blue, orange, green, brown are the designation colors of the white group. Now, there's 5 groups, there are 5 groups, and each group has 5 designation colors. So the first one is the white group, and it contains blue, orange, green, brown, slate. Right? The slate here means that's gray. Right? I just wrote the 3-letter designations for that because it just that's the way things are presented with the 3 letters. So yes, it's BLUE, but BLU is the one that stands for for blue. So blue, orange, green, brown, and if you put a gray here because it's a gray, it would be too close. The 3-letter designation would just look too close to the green, GRY or GRN. So my guess is, and I think I'm pretty right on the ball, is that the slate was decided to be used so it doesn't look like GRN or GRY, right? So slate is gray, right? So each group contains those each group contains those designation colors. 5. Each group has 5 designation colors: blue, orange, green, brown, slate. The first ones you know: blue, orange, green, brown. Just have to remember slate, which is the gray. And there are 5 groups: white, red, black, yellow, violet. And we're going to I'm going to teach you how to remember those colors. Within about 3 minutes from now, you're going to remember the 25 pair color code without having to write it down. Okay, yeah. The 25 pair cables look like this, and we are going to play with those during the lab after the next one that's coming. So that's basically what it looks like. Now, it does have some twist. Originally, it was done for category 3, which sort of becomes obsolete, but it's still being used, not necessarily for the data communications, but maybe for other. You can still connect regular telephone lines through that, or you can still connect the telephone system proprietary telephone lines, which is not the single line telephone set. Single line telephone set is a telephone set that you buy in the hardware store, and you can plug into the POTS line. So that's a single line set. But there are also proprietary telephone sets that don't work as POTS, but they work with the telephone system, the telephone box that is basically installed in the facility, a small business or big business or whatnot. So those telephones are not going to work with POTS, but they're going to work with that box or the telephone system, or the switch box, or the switcher, the KSU, key service unit. Right? So those cables are still able to carry the signal for those phones. Right? And it does, there's a tiny bit of a twist. Now, sometimes you're going to see also Cat5e. I just put Cat5, but there are Cat5e 25 pair cables. And you can notice, I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but on the literature that you can download, you can see a little bit better. There is a tighter twist, right? Because the reason why we have twist is so that the electromagnetic field, if the pair was straight, the electromagnetic field builds up around that pair as the pair conducts electricity or electric current. Then the electric current causes electromagnetic field around the cable. And if there's another cable that's beside it and it's also straight, that electromagnetic field can affect the other pair by induction, and it can cause electric current to flow. So that means that's a bleed through conversation. So you could hear other conversation on the same line. So it's interference, right? Or crosstalk, it's called. Okay. So if you twist the pair, then that electromagnetic field is kind of dispersed. It doesn't have the strength to be induced onto the other cable. And if the other pair is also twisted, then there's even less of a chance for the interference to happen. And if one pair is twisted at a different rate, slightly different rate at the other one, so then there's even less chance of the crosstalk to happen, right? So that's why, that's why we have the twist. And the Cat3 will have a minimum amount of twist. Cat5e or Cat5 or Cat5e, it needs to have a tighter twist because some of the frequencies are higher, and the speed transfer rate needs to happen quite faster. So that means we need to even lessen the chance so that there's a more twist happening than in the Cat3, right? So the specifications are higher for Cat5 or Cat5e or whatnot. We will take a look at the different type of cables later on. Right? So that's what they look like, the cables. Now, let's take 2 minutes to learn the 25 pair color code. Right? Notice that each group, there's 5 groups. There are 50 conductors in the 25 pair color code because it's 25 pairs and pair is 2, which means it's 50 conductors. Right? So 25 pairs. So each pair consists of a solid and a stripe or a group color. Sometimes we call it stripe because the blue pair would have a solid blue conductor and would be accompanied by the group color, which in this case would be white, with little tiny dashes, so stripes of the same color as a designation. Right? So here's a solid, and here's a group, or solid or stripe, or designation and group color. Right? So each and every group would have the repeating pattern of blue, orange, green, brown, slate. Again, blue, orange, green, brown, slate. Again, blue, orange, you got it, okay? You got the idea. So here is all I have to do is remember those 5 colors: blue, orange, green, brown, slate. You already remember by working with it the designation colors: blue, orange, green, brown. And then you just add to your memory the slate, which is gray. Now here are the groups. How do we remember the groups? Well, the first one you already remember because when you strip the data cable, you're going to see the white group. You're going to see blue, blue, white, orange, orange, white, green, green, white, and brown, brown, white. So it's a white group. In the 25 pair 25 pair cable, the next group is going to be red group. So you're going to have blue and red, orange and red, green and red, brown and red, and slate and red. Next one is black, yellow, and violet. How do you remember the groups? As I said, the first one you already know because excuse me, because you work with it already. All right. Now, we are in Canada, so what are the Canadian colors? Well, it's white and red. Well, there you go. Here's the next group. We use the Canadian colors in Canada. Well, if you happen to be Swedish or Norwegian or German or Italian or Portuguese, too bad. You still have to use Canadian colors for the 25 pair color code, all right? So it's white and red is the next one, right? Now, there is there's a rhyme thing that is being taught to the children of the elementary schools and the kindergartens in the southern states of USA. Quite often in Texas, it's a popular rhyme thing. And it goes like this: black and yellow killed a fellow, right? Quite a terrible situation here, right? It comes from the coral snake that is very popular in those areas. And that coral snake is quite aggressive and quite poisonous. It can kill you. It will kill, right? So, but there is also another snake, and yesterday somebody knew the name of the other snake, something king snake, that is basically in poster of that one, but it's not poisonous. And the coral snake has the rings, black, yellow, red, or whatever it is, in the pattern. And they're arranged in a way that the black and yellow meet together. So that's the one that's poisonous. The other one is imposter, and it has the same colors of the rings, but they're arranged in a slightly different way, so the black and yellow don't meet. So they teach the children in the kindergartens and in elementary school to be careful when you see that kind of snake, so they could distinguish and just basically stay away from that when they see black and yellow. So they see black and yellow, kill a fellow. Right? And then here's the thing. Here's the last one, last color, is the violet. Just think of that. Violence is the last thing we ever need. Violence sounds like violet. And it's the last color. Right? So we have a white group because we already remember that. Canadian colors, white, red, black and yellow, kill a fellow, and violence is the last thing we ever need. Do you remember that color code now? There you go. 25 pair color cable, one 25 pair cable is made out of 25 pair bundle. And it's bound. You're going to, when you strip the jacketing, you're going to see two strings there, and maybe a string and a ribbon. But quite often now you're going to see two strings. One string is going to be spiral wrapped around that bundle, and the other one is just basically inserted in a straight way, so you could use it as a ripcord. And of course, if there's just a single pair, you're going to see both of them white. Right? But if it comes to using a 100 pair cable, because sometimes you need more pairs, and instead of using 4 25 pair cables, you can buy one 100 pair cable. How do you distinguish the colors there? Same way that you distinguish the colors in 25 pair, because 100 pair cable is 4 25 pair bundles carried or embedded in the same jacket. So how do you distinguish? Because they're the same. How do you know which bundle is which? Well, they use ribbons or colors of the pull strings. This one here, it looks like it's a ribbon. It's a blue ribbon, which designates, or the white-blue ribbon, it designates the first bundle. Second bundle would have an orange, I'm not sure if you can see it here, an orange ribbon or an orange pull string. And that's going to be the second bundle. Third bundle would be green and brown. Notice those colors? They're very similar, or they're exactly the same to the first designation colors, first 4 designation colors. There you go. Here's a 100 pair cable. One thing I'm going to tell you about the 100 pair cable, once you strip the jacketing, you have to catch those ribbons or catch those colored strings. So you take one bundle at a time. You catch the blue one, and you take that blue ribbon that accommodates that bundle, and you tie it around that bundle to keep it together. Then you get the next one, is the orange ribbon. You catch that ribbon, you tie it around that bundle, and so on with the green and brown. Because if you don't do that, and if you just let it go, all the pairs are going to mix, and you will not know whether the blue pair is the first pair of the first bundle, or is that blue pair the first pair of the third bundle, right? So that's how the 100 pair cable is made. What we're going to use, what we're going to do in the lab, we are all going to terminate something that's called a BIX termination strip. BIX is a termination platform. It's an IDC. What's IDC? Insulation displacement connection. We already are doing that with the toolless jacks and the 110 punch down. So the data jacks that we have, and mostly are being used when it's using punch down platform, they're using the 110 punch down tools. Now, when it comes to another punch-down platform that is very common in North America is the BIX, B-I-X. It's the same thing, except it physically looks a little bit different when it comes to the shape of the punched connection. So if you have a BIX platform, you should use the BIX punch-down tool because it has a specifically shaped head that accommodates this type of platform connection. 110 is the same thing, except it's physically different. You should use the 110 punch-down tool. Another different platforms would be 66 punch-down platform, which is older one. Still, sometimes you can see them in the States, and some of the older installations in Canada. So once you're in the lab, just ask us. We're going to show you the BIX, and we're going to show you the 66 because we have both of them mounted on the wall, so you could see what that is. But we're going to do 110 and BIX. That's what we'll be playing with. Another one is Kron, K-R-O-N-E, right? And that is also same thing, IDC, installation displacement connection, using punch-down tool. It's more popular in Europe and UK, in England. Right? So we're going to terminate the 25 pair cable onto one termination strip in a specific way. That's the lab. That's going to be the only lab we're going to do during that lab session, because it takes a little bit longer. So those termination strips are being connected with those wires or the pairs on one side. Once the termination is done, those termination strips fit into the frames right here. And you're arranging them from the front, punching them from the front, and you're flipping them so the front becomes the back. So you could grab those connections from the front using same way, punch down connections, IDC, using a cross connect wire if you need to connect that pair to some other pair going somewhere else. So this could be a cable that goes from here to some other room, and they meet in the communication room, and this would be another big field or termination field that accommodates the wires going somewhere else. And sometimes this pair needs to be connected to that pair and that pair, depending on what what needs to be connected, using a cross connect wire. So that's how this is basically the application of that. When you're going to have the lab, that's called 25 pair lab, there is a video that I made that you absolutely have to watch before you come to the lab to perform the lab, to do the lab. Yes, it is about hour and 20 minutes. It talks about the different aspects of the BIX terminations and isolation displacement, and then I take you step by step of what you're actually going to be doing and how. And if you don't watch that, you're going to be very uncomfortable, as you could tell from the previous labs. Another way of applying that 25 pair cable. Let's say this is a telephone system or telephone switch. Here's the 25 pair cable. There is something that's called the RJ21X connector. Remember, RJ stands for registered jack. It looks like this. It's like a lengthy jack. We have that in the class. Ask me, I'll show you where that is and how it works. So this would be all the connections that have to do with the telephone system. They're terminated on that jack, plugged in. That connection is being brought out by the 25 pair cable, terminated on the BIX field, so it could be cross-connected to other things. So let's say this particular one has pair number 1 is extension phone number 1, pair number 2 is 2. This one can accommodate up to 8 extensions. It's a small business type of a solution, and 3 POTS lines. The one that we have in the class, it's called 616, and it can accommodate 6 telephone lines and 16 extensions. It works the same way. So that's how we're basically using those. All right, and here's the references that I had to include in the literature, because sometimes we have to borrow pictures from the internet and we have to provide the references. All right, so yeah, Okay, look at that. We have 1 minute to spare. If there are any questions, by all means, ask me now or send me an email if you need some clarifications. You need to know the 25 pair color code. It's just like, knowing the alphabet when you're writing, when you learn how to read and write. It is also important that you grasp the concept between the baseband and the broadband. So when somebody is talking to you in a work field, you're not standing with the mouth wide open, listening and not knowing what they're talking about. All right. Plus, it is important to know that anyway for whatever other purposes. Cool. That's pretty much it for today, and I will see some of us during the lab today, and the rest I'm going to see you when I see you. Thank you very much.